Okay, we're live, so no cussing, no more cussing. All right, guys. This is going to be a bit weird. We're going to be going over the Meno, kind of quickly, and then when another student shows up, what student? Okay, when another person shows up to this little like lecture recording, then we're going to switch to our topic of truth. This right here is only going to be for my intro to philosophy class. It won't be for ethics of the dying. So yeah, let's go straight to the Meno, right? So we have two people in this room with me, no further than 6 feet apart. So no snitching to admin, right? All right. So the Meno starts off with, let me introduce. There's Freddie in the back, and then Steve-O in the front. Scotty's going to be coming pretty quick. These are all sort of fake names, right? Stephen's an accomplished philosopher in training, right? Scott's a learning philosopher, and Freddie's just the best dude I ever met, right? He won't be talking to Freddie, but Stephen will, right? Stephen's going to be a real big part of this lecture talk. So is Scott. Scott's going to probably be the most important because he knows nothing of this class, right? So he'll be representing you guys and your guys' voice as probably as close as possible, rather than Stephen. Stephen may be asking crazy questions that, you won't need to worry about in this class. Yeah. So let's start with the Meno. As that one nerdy dude said in the YouTube summary, right? Oh yeah, you guys probably can't see this. Oh no, you can see this actually. Okay, if you can't see this, I'm sorry. Everyone in this room can see it. Yeah, Stephen, you can see it?
Yes.
Okay. So if you don't see it, don't worry. Just try to pay really close attention to what I'm saying. Yeah. So the Meno, right, as that guy in the video says, is an epistemological masterpiece, right? And since by the time you guys have this, most of you should have already watched that introduction to philosophy video, that 1 hour lecture, right? Epistemology means what? What does epistemology mean? Stephen, what is epistemology? Is the study of what? Yeah, the study of knowledge. The study of knowledge, right? And so when we talk about the study of knowledge, we're talking about answering a particular sort of questions about knowledge. So like, what sort of questions about knowledge do you think? Oh, all right, Scott's coming in right now. When we talk about epistemology, so I guess Scott's going to be here for this lecture. When we talk about epistemological questions or questions about knowledge, what kind of questions are we talking about? Questions like,
what do I know? Like, what do I know?
Yeah, right. What
do I know from
do I know? This is a kind of epistemological question. I don't think it is an epistemological question. But I think there's more focused ones we can ask. Like, what is knowledge?
Okay.
What is knowledge? I'm going to write K here. If you guys can see the board, I'm just writing K. K is going to always mean knowledge. This is like epistemologist shorthand for knowledge is K. Okay. Even if you're in the class, you can't see that. Okay. What is K? What is knowledge? Yeah. What other epistemological questions can we ask? What do you guys think? How about this? Like, what does science tell us? Or how about this? Does science give us knowledge? And when I'm talking about science, I'm talking about this empirical work. And by empirical, I mean what, Stephen?
Through practice.
Not through practice. I mean, practice is going to get thrown in here. But if I'm
Like I can see.
yes, something forensic, right? So when I talk about like an empirical sense of knowledge, right? I'm talking about a knowledge that comes through the senses, as opposed to knowledge that comes through not empirical but rational knowledge that comes from reason. So very big one very big topic within epistemology is reason versus empiricism. Yeah, empiricism. Whoops. There we go. What's the difference between the two? And what's the relationship to knowledge between empiricism and rationalism? Yeah. Here we go. And this question, the difference between reason and empiricism. So knowledge through reason alone and knowledge through observation alone. This is a part of a more general conversation. Yeah, and that more general conversation is, let's see here, Scott. So Scotty just walked in, right? Can you guess what this more general conversation that the rationalism versus empiricism is trying to get at? How do we what? It's the title of our textbook.
How do we know?
Yeah, how do we know? How do we
obtain knowledge?
Yes. That's it. Yeah, that's exactly right. How do we obtain knowledge? Yeah. This is a question about knowledge acquisition. Right. And the Meno, so let me just read back to you some of these epistemological questions here. Okay. The Meno is actually going to address all of these questions.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's going to do so in an extremely significant way historically. Yeah. So which is hence why the guy in the video we watched called the Meno an epistemological masterpiece, because that's exactly what it is, right? And man, it's really hard to see this sort of, to see why it's such a masterpiece, because it all sounds like crazy shit when you first read it, right? So Scott, did you finish the Meno, and did you think it was like kind of weird?
Yeah, a little bit, but it made sense.
You're right. Yes, it makes a ton of sense at the end. So at the end, we get a story about what is knowledge, and that's really subtle. When you take this quiz, which you saw that the quiz is extended until Saturday midnight. Yeah. Right. That's going to be a question on the quiz. What does science give us in terms of knowledge? Right. What's the difference between reason and observation? Right. And then how do we obtain knowledge in general is going to be answered by what's the sort of difference between knowledge and reason in terms of, or reason and empiricism in terms of knowledge. Remember that, reason is obvious. Pure reason is jumping from what we call premises to conclusions without any observation. So an example of that would be, so let me show you guys something purely rational. So 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? And so I'm going to ask you guys, well, how do you know this, right? And most of you who are watching this at home while you, right, play Fortnite or Call of Duty, or watch some trash TV, right? You're probably like, well, that's kind of a dumbass question, right? How do I know 2 plus 2 equals 4? Right? Remember, I'm asking you guys an epistemological question, right? I'm not asking why does 2 plus 2 equal 4. I'm asking, how do you know that 2 plus 2 equals 4? And you go, oh, well, that's really easy. right? And it's actually an incredibly dumbass question. So here's two markers, and here's two markers. If you put them together, you get how many fucking markers?
4.
4, right? Yeah, but these are what, Stephen?
4 individual markers.
Yeah, there we go. They're markers. Does this equation right here, does this refer to markerhood?
No.
No. In fact, when I describe numbers in this way, numbers become the adjective for the subject marker, right? The object is not 2 plus 2 equaling 4. The objects in question is this stuff and this stuff equaling this stuff. And you go, okay, well that's like a weird little like trick you're doing, right? You're talking some weird little madness. Yeah. But when we ask, okay, who in here, and I'm talking about you guys that listen at home, who in here actually thinks that they know that 2 plus 2 equals 4? That you actually know that? Yeah, Freddie in the back says yes, he knows it. And not really Freddie. That's funny, I'm calling him Freddie, but you guys don't know that when you watch this. Yeah, if you don't think that you know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, man, you're probably not ready for college, right? You're either a really experienced philosopher or, man, you're not ready for this class. And that's like a weird thing to say, right? You either become an expert and you say, oh yeah, well maybe knowledge about this sort of thing, is it possible? Or you're probably a dumbass. So you're either a super expert or you're an idiot.
Or you're both.
Or you're both, right? Yes, and that's a tragedy, right? Yeah. You should think that you know this. That there's some sort of knowledge to be had about these figures in which you see no real object tethered to them. There's no object to 2. At least there's none on the board. This is literally just shit on the board, right? That's not 2. This is not 2. Yet we say that there's some objectivity that these signals refer to. In the same way that this formula up here, Jacob, refers to this object. This is an objective entity. Look, I'm an object, right? Floor game, oof, right? This is supposed to do the same thing. And that this whole thing is what we call true, and we know it objectively. Now, where's the empirical knowledge in this front? If we think that we can know something like this, but knowledge about this does not come from observation, then we're going to believe in this sort of acquiring knowledge through reason alone. And in the Meno, this is the story we're going to get. Okay? But it's not just going to be about math, or like how the slave boy points out, it's not just going to be about geometry, right? And the Pythagorean theorem, right? If you didn't catch exactly what the slave boy is figuring out on his own, the reason. Yeah, it's freaking crazy, right? But that's exactly how we all learn math. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's going to be about, the Meno is going to be a story about knowledge acquisition. And now we're going to start talking about some metaphysics here. Knowledge acquisition about IDs, right? Our identity. What it means to like be you, and how do we know that that's what you are, right? And so we actually, this conversation doesn't really get had about people, right? So when you think about, well, who are we, right? We all say we belong to the same group of, the group of persons, right? And that's real. And that I don't look anything like Stephen or Scott or Freddie, right? But we still belong to the same group, yeah? That this is one of the essential, do you hear? I'm talking about essences now. That when we talk about who I am, the notion of personhood gets essentially called upon, right? We don't necessarily have that talk about persons, but this is what this is going to get to, right? But instead, we start off with a conversation about what? About virtue. What's the identity of virtue? Yeah. And so Meno, right? So Socrates and Meno start having this weird ass conversation, right? And they go, okay, they want to find out. So here's the metaphysical question. What is virtue? So remember, this is a question about metaphysics. Is there something metaphysically real about virtue? And virtue in this context is going to be talking about that excellent character, right? So what is virtue? And Meno goes and gives at least what would seem intuitive to like a lot of us, like when we first walk into this conversation, he starts giving, so he's asking for the definition of virtue itself, but Meno starts doing what? He starts giving example. Yeah, so these are little v's, okay? Meno, instead of answering the question, what is virtue, he starts giving, what is it, Scott? Examples of virtue. He starts giving instances of virtue. So he gives the virtue of a man, the virtue of a child, right? And all of these virtues are what? All of these examples are, they're what to each other? Is the virtue of a man, is the excellent character of a man the same excellent character as a child?
No.
No, they're two totally different things. But why are these answers a question? Why are these answers like a problem?
Because they're societally contingent. Like
we don't want to say society, so we don't want to assume that this is all made up through society, right? So we don't want to assume this about the meta. So that would be a view of virtue that is, I'm being super reductive about your answer, but that'd be like an anti-realist answer, right? And both of these guys are going to be radical realist. So if you remember from that video, at least I'm pretty sure that's in that Oxford video. When we're talking about metaphysics, if you think that something really exists, then we call you a realist about that thing.
Okay, so then the virtues of the child would be obedience to the parent.
Yes, there we go. All good kids are like obedient to their parents. But is that the virtue of a man? No, a man's got to think for himself, right? Or herself.
That's kind of why I was saying societally contingent, because like that, when you get to the man, like that's going to be the factors of that society, what they say a good man is, then that'll be. I
don't want to say society. Yeah, you're right there. You're right. But I don't want to say because I mean, there's like biological virtue also, like a good tree, the virtue of a tree.
Maybe humility.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, humility, right? That's going to be a virtue that they both probably share, a man and a child. Humility, right? But like the virtue of a tree, to be a good tree, looks a lot different than to be a good person. And that's not going to necessarily be societally contingent, right? But so here we go, a man, a child, a tree, we can throw in our own stuff, a dog, a horse, that may sound familiar to you guys, right? All of these instances, all of these examples or instantiations are all going to be, so for a tree to grow big and have a nice strong trunk, this is in good character for the tree. For a dog to listen to its master and protect its house, this is going to be in good virtue of the dog. And in both of those instances, we still refer to that same word, virtue, right? And so these examples of virtue don't cut it. And to focus in on this, we could talk about persons, right? Okay, so if someone were to ask me, okay, what is personhood? What is this identity you have? and I say, what, and I go, okay, well, I'm getting like overwhelmed by this weird ass question. I go, okay, well, that's a person. And I point towards Stephen. And you go, okay, well, all right, but isn't that a person? And you point towards Scott. Or my buddy Hildreth's in the class. And I go, oh, that's a person? Right? Freddie's laughing because Hildreth, you'll never see this, but you're a crazy student. But you look at all three of those people and you go, these guys are three totally different things. And to define the whole of personhood, what we're going to call the form or the essence of personhood itself through Stephen doesn't actually cut it. It doesn't fully encompass that essence. And so we go, okay, well, how do we know forms, or how do we know, so not just the form of virtue, but the virtue of color, but the definition of color, the definition of personhood. You could think of like the definition of love, right? The definition of all of these things. How do we know the language that matches the essence to all these ideas that we have? And we go, well, it can't be through observation. Why? Yes, you don't see the big V virtue. You don't see the big P person, right? You got to be careful there, okay? Yes, you see what we observe empirically is just the instance, but somehow we know that these instances belong to the form without ever actually seeing the form itself, and that should freak us out a little bit, right? That I know that 1 and 2 are both numbers, but I've never seen either, right? I know that blue is like red, even though when you look at them, they're not the same, okay? I know that Stephen's a person, and I know that Hildreth's a person, even though they don't totally encompass that identity of personhood, right? They don't service the full definition of themselves, right? But I somehow know these essential categories that we belong to. Yeah, so these are actually all going to be, they're going to be reflections of the forms, okay? So I'm going to pause right here for a second, and I'm going to kind of jump into the metaphysics that's being argued here apart from the text. Okay, so pause right here. This is not a part of what you read. Okay. Okay, the metaphysics, or what we're going to call Plato's metaphysics, right? So we live down here. So I'm drawing this. This isn't exactly how it is, but this is the best way to conceptualize it, right? This sort of temporal writing. So here we are in the material world. This is where all the material stuff is, yeah? You can think of just like all like the dust, right? If we're being super old Judaic, right? Or we could be Newtonian about it, say this is where all the particles are. Yeah, and then somehow all this material stuff breaks out and starts to create come into form, right? So if you look at the this is going to be so here we go. This is Pickle Rick. Right, and there's Rick, yeah. The chemical difference between the two of them is extremely slim. But when I describe the pickle, right, I don't call it a person, I call it a pickle. And when I explain Rick over here, I call it a person. I don't call it a pickle or a vegetable. These guys have two different essences, they have two different identities, right? I'm not a dog, my dog is not a person, right? I'm not a pickle, the pickle's not a person. And so we have all this material stuff. But how does all this material stuff break itself off into all these different forms? Well, there is a world of forms. And this is where the perfect entities live. Yeah, the perfect ideas. So the perfect conception or framework of a person lives in this heavenly world. In fact, we call this Platonic heaven, right? God is up here. The greatest good is up here. They may be the same thing. We'll get into that later, right? This is where numbers live, right? This is where beauty lives. Do we call this a Platonic heaven? Because this is where conceptual perfection exists. And all of this stuff in the material world, it exists the way it does because it imitates these perfect conceptions. So why do I get called a person? Well, because my material copies this perfect idea of a person, right? I participate in the form of personhood. And anything else that has this identity is doing the same thing. So like, Stephen is a person. He's a different piece of material than me, but we share in the same perfect form, right? Anything that is a dog, you draw a dog. That looks like a weird furry. Right, there we go. That was even worse. Anything that's a dog is a dog because it participates in the form of doghood. Yeah. Okay. And this sounds really crazy, but I promise you that our new science is going to be based on this. Our scientific revolution is going to be a revival of this crazy stuff. If you are Christian or Catholic, this is, in some way, this is where you're at, right? In the beginning, there was the Logos, right? And finish it, Stephen. Right. That the way the world is, right? This perfection, it is God. It's where God is. That's why we call it a Platonic heaven, right? This is where order, this is where the form of the world gets its order and its form, yeah, from the Platonic forms. Okay. Now, when we transition from virtue to this conversation with the slave, right? Now we start getting explicitly empirical, not just metaphysical, right? And so when we talk about, well, how do we know these forms if we don't actually see them? I've never actually seen virtue in itself. I've only seen examples of it. I've only seen instantiations of it, right? How do I know the Platonic forms, right? How do I know this stuff? And Socrates says what?
Doesn't he make an argument that you're born with some like innate understanding?
Right. That all knowledge, yes, it's all innate, right? That all learning is, we'll put it in more language. All learning is remembering. Yeah. All learning is remembering. And this sounds really stupid, right? Well, I mean, for most of us in here, the Platonic form stuff, when I first heard this, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. I remember being a student at BC thinking, what is this BS? Who would ever actually believe something, right? I thought I was some like technological, like iPhone 10X, right? Maybe not an 11, but I was still like, well, we're way beyond any of these weird, archaic ideas, right? And this was also something in there as well. Right. This is also weird, that all learning is remembering, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Why? Because, man, I've had a lot of teachers, right? And these teachers seem to be giving me new knowledge. New knowledge. But new knowledge is not possible if Socrates is right. How do we know about all this different metaphysical stuff? I know that I'm a person, and I know that the virtue of being a person is different than the virtue of being a dog and being a kid. And I know about mathematics, right? And that all the stuff I learned in math is actually new knowledge. How is this possible, right? Well, Socrates says it's actually not. There's no such thing as new knowledge. Everything is just remembering. And how does he show for this?
So now where he takes the unlearned slave through the Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah, so he talks to the slave boy, and he's unlearned. That's the biggest part.
He demonstrates that he knew something without having gone to that thing.
Right. The slave boy he's a slave. He's never been in a classroom. He's never taken classes on geometry.
No.
He's not allowed. He just, I don't know, does all the slave stuff, right? Yeah. And yet Socrates, what does he do? He approaches him and he asks questions only. And remember that by the time you're watching this, you will have already watched our conversation on truth. And the idea that Socrates is only asking questions is important because questions are never true. Socrates never gives the slave boy any truth. And yet the slave boy is able to, yes, through reason alone, arrive at some goddamn truth. And not just any truth, right? I'm talking that real truth. And how did he know it? Well, Socrates said it must have been in him all along. And this sounds really crazy, but think about like when you lose your keys, right? Think about when you lose your keys and you spend like 3 hours looking for it, right? Your boyfriend or girlfriend or wife or husband's like about to kick the shit out of you, right? And you're sitting there going, man, where is it? And finally you found it, right? It's underneath the sofa. Oh no, it's better yet, it's in your pants pocket. Dig through your laundry and you find your keys there. And you have this like moment. It's that aha moment. And it's almost like, I knew that. Even though it wasn't like present in like my foremind. And now think back to when you were doing math as a little kid. And you're sitting here, right? Here we go. I know you guys probably can't see this in the video. But here's 4, right? Here's 2 plus 2, right? And let's say, there we go. So here's a bunch of apples. And then here's like the number 4, right? All in dotted line. And you're sitting there, right, with your messed up little hands, that your little muscles that aren't good at holding things yet because you're only 5. And you sit there and go, oh my gosh, right? This many plus this many equals 4. And you do that over and over and over again until finally, what are you, like 5.5 at this point? It finally clicks in your goddamn mind. And you go, oh yeah, that's right. And you have that same aha moment when you're figuring out basic arithmetic. And even when you start doing like more advanced kind of proofs, or if X then Y, if Y then Z, and you're taking your intro to philosophy or your intro to logic class, and you go, oh no shit, right? If X then Z. You have that aha moment. Right? And Socrates is making the case that this is how all real knowledge comes to us. Not through observation, but instead we understand and we know what we look at because we already know the forms before we looked at them. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that Stephen is a person and Scott's a person. I would just say, okay, there's that thing and there's that thing. In the same way, I wouldn't know that 2 and 2 equal 4. I would just see a bunch of markers, right? And for some of us, for some of us, I'm guessing like, if I had to approximate, there's probably like 1/4 of us in this class right now that are going to be watching this. They're like, oh yeah, of course, right? I'm a rationalist. If you're a math major, right, and you're always wondering why the hell I'm in there with the other, why I'm grouped in with the other STEM members, science, technology, and engineering. Why are we in there? We are not empirical. Math is not scientific. It's purely a matter of reason, going from premises to conclusions. Yeah, making those weird mental leaps. Right. Socrates is making a case that without those weird mental leaps, there is no knowledge of anything. Identity goes out the window, math goes out the window, right? And ultimately, right, science is impossible without this sort of thing. Yeah. And then we close this out. We close this weird, crazy conversation out with not about a conversation about how we know, but this last question addressed is the first one we wrote when we talked about epistemology. And it's the question about what is knowledge. And Socrates points out that knowledge is not the same as true belief. Just because, so I'm going to write a TB, I need you guys to be able to see this, I'm trying to write this big. Just because you have a true belief, that does not mean that you have knowledge. And this is extremely significant. Okay? And this idea is going to survive till today. Okay? Why isn't true belief the same as knowledge?
Knowledge requires facts, like factual evidence to back it.
Almost. Not just facts. Actually, facts aren't going to be necessary for this last component. Scott, what do you think? What's wrong with this? An experience? Okay, yeah, okay. That's actually closer than facts by a lot. I think experience is closer than facts by a lot. That's not supposed to be a pound or a hashtag, right? It's supposed to be like a not equal. Yeah, sorry about that. People at home, what number is K? So let me give an example, okay? And I'm going to speak to this because these guys haven't, well, Stephen's actually heard this lecture, but you need to have watched the lecture on truth to really understand why this is so, exactly what's going on. So asking Scott about this isn't going to be fair, right? So let's pretend like here's the world, our actual world, W with an A next to it, okay? Right? And this is me. And I become a Buddhist, right? I believe that this is true. So this is in my head right here, okay? I believe that this is true. Buddhism is real. Buddhism is real. Yeah, B stands for Buddhism. Okay. I believe this. Now let's say I believe this because, right, I get my mom and dad catch me smoking, I don't know, cigarettes in the backyard, right? I get real pissed. I get in my Mercedes, right? I'm driving out of the Garces parking lot. Burnout, right? I'm so pissed. I go to Starbucks and I'm like, man, I hate my parents. I get out to get my whatever. I'm offending all my Garces people. I live down the street from you guys, so I'm not talking too much trash, right? I show up to Starbucks and I go to order my drink and I look over and there's this hipster dude, right? And he's this white dude with dreadlocks, and he's got a ukulele, right? He's got no shoes on, and he's singing "Hey There, Delilah" right on repeat at the Starbucks, asking for money, right? And I look at him, right? Got my tie on and stuff, right? And I go, man, this guy is so cool. I bet my parents would hate his ass. So I walk up and I start talking to him. And he starts talking to me. I'm, man, how did you get so free? And he starts telling me about Buddhism, right? Not the real Buddhism, but more like the hipster version of Buddhism, right? And I'm listening to this, smelling his bad hipster breath, okay? And I just think in my head, wow, this guy is so cool. I want to be like him. It would really piss my parents off. My parents would hate it if I was Buddhism, and if I was a Buddhist. And guess what? I'm now going to really start considering myself a Buddhist. And let's say weeks and months goes by, I start living the Buddhist lifestyle, and I actually somehow convince myself that Buddhism is real, right? And I come to this belief, Buddhism is real. I actually believe this. Now let's say that in the actual world, Buddhism is the case. Buddhism is real, right? The religion of Buddhism, if you call it that, right? It's actually the case. This is how the world is. Buddhism is a fact. And guess what? I believe it, which means that I have a true belief. Now, let's say we all die and in some weird Christian version of Buddhism, we all go to like some heavenly plane, right? And I'm sitting here like, man, I told you guys Buddhism was real and you didn't listen to me. Why didn't you listen to me? I knew it. Do you guys think, so you guys at home, so literally take 5 seconds to think about this. Do you think I, the hipster, right, the rebellious hipster, knew that Buddhism was true? Did I know that's how the world was? Does that constitute knowledge? It's true and I believe it. Does that constitute knowledge?
No.
Why not? What am I missing?
Evidence.
Yeah, evidence. That's a big one. I don't have any evidence. In fact, I didn't believe it. My belief doesn't come from the facts. It doesn't come from reality. It comes from something else. I don't believe it because it's true. I believe it because my parents, my parents hated it and I thought it was tight. In fact, we would just say, if I was barking at you guys in Buddhist heaven, you guys would just say I was lucky. Why would I believe you when you just got lucky? You weren't trustworthy. You believed the truth, but that doesn't constitute knowledge. Yeah? Now let's say that I did believe that Buddhism was real. Okay? Let's say I believe that Buddhism was real. Buddhism is in fact real, so it's a true belief, but I didn't believe that Buddhism was real because some hipster dude, was playing Hey There, Delilah on a ukulele and I thought it was tight. I believed it because I had a real Buddhist experience. I experienced a Buddha. One of the Buddhas really came up to me and showed himself to me, gave me that Buddhist revelation. And that's why I believe the fact that Buddhism is true. Would you say I know that? So for those of you guys having a hard time following the Buddhist sort of stuff, picture that you're a Catholic.
Is that
Right.
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 It's evidence if it's subjective. Again, we met another person who claimed to be enlightened.
Yeah. So that's a different question. So the question about what is evidence is a different question than what is knowledge. But we know that knowledge is going to constitute, and this is the whole point of the end of the Meno. Knowledge is going to constitute you believing something, that thing being true, and you being justified to believe that it's true. Knowledge at this point, up until 1969, is going to be equal to, if and only if, stronger than equivalent. Yeah. Justified true belief. If you have a justified true belief, then you have knowledge. If you have knowledge, then you have a justified true belief. You can't just have true belief. True belief is not enough, right? And like to put it in into something more typical for our like religious climate, right? And this isn't just religion. This is all of science. He doesn't use any religious analogy here to give us this understanding. Instead, he talks about the map maker, right? The guy who knows where he's going, and then the guy who gets where he's going, then he gets there, and then the guy who looked at the map and got there, right? One of these guys gets lucky. The other one had reason to believe. Yeah. Think about this, like, oh man, I'm a Catholic. Why am I a Catholic, right? So this is what I usually do in this class. I walk up to like, Christian, you're in my class. I sit there and go, okay, Christian, you're a Catholic. Why are you a Catholic? And I'm putting words in your mouth, Christian, right? I don't know you for anything, right? Christian sits there and goes, well, this is the answer I typically get. Well, this is just how I was raised. Now, let's say that Catholicism ends up being the way the world is, not Buddhism, but Catholicism. So you believe the truth, but do we say that Christian knew? No, Christian got lucky that his parents told him to believe in Catholicism, right? Okay, now Samantha, you're also in this class. Let's say I ask Samantha, all right, Samantha, why are you a Catholic? And Samantha goes, well, right, I woke up and I had sleep paralysis, right? And in this moment of like, right, lowered awareness and yet hyper awareness at the same time, right? I had a revelation of Christ, right? And that Christ actually, in fact, came down, right, and gave me this sort of intuitive experience while I was in this like troubled state, right? I suffered for a time and Christ revealed himself, right? Now let's say that you believe it, you're justified in that that's actually true. Well, Samantha's reason for being a Catholic, Samantha's reason for true belief is justified, while Christians as an adult, maybe not so much. Yeah? Okay. Justified true belief equals K. Right. Okay. All right. That's enough for this Meno talk. I will pause this, and yeah, that's good.